One of a kind, love affair, ooh.
What year?
60
Give me
something?
a year. Oh, I should know this.
Yeah, you should know this. This is when you were in your teens.
This is my prime era.
And I sing this song, the One of a Kind song, because I want to talk to you and you about cars that are rare and special and there are one of or few of. And this is the latest episode of the Carmudgeon Show. My name is Jason Camisa. This is Derek. What's your name?
DTS. You can call me DTS.
This is DTS, or DT apostrophe hyphen slash S. Yeah, no, I want to talk to you about, so I always laugh when I read like a Craigslist ad or a BringATrailer ad for a car that it's like one of only 274 in this color combination this year. That is not a fucking rare car. Excuse my French. That is not a fucking rare car. I mean, one of 3 produced period ever or remaining, that's a rare car.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree with you there. But I think ordinarily the values reflect that. There's some exceptions, like in the muscle car world, where you're like, it's one of 6 Hemi convertible Charger, Challenger, I forget.
Insert name of
remember,
cool
whatever.
car.
And then they're like $1 million, or were $1 million, at a time when baby boomers all were having a lot of disposable income and wanted the thing that nobody else had. But ordinarily, like to get really big, like 7-figure values, like I was thinking about this the other day. Besides the Gullwing, I can't think of a 7-figure car that they made more than 1,000 of.
Right. So this is something that you know, the people outside the collector car world probably don't think about all the time, is that the cars with the biggest, highest values tend to be cars that were produced in extraordinarily low numbers, and not just a variant of a car. So I have a Mercedes 190 Cosworth. They made, for the US market, 1,958 or something. Worldwide, something like 20,000 16-valve 190s. That's a lot of cars in the collector car world, but it's not. 20,000 is a fairly rare car, but it's 20,000 out of 2 million W201s. So this is a very high volume, mass produced cars. Yeah. Same thing with my E30 Touring. It's a one variant with one engine of a car they made 2 million of. Scirocco, a 16-valve, they made 10,000 for the US, whatever. That's not a lot, but they still did make hundreds of thousands of these cars. They will, so I thought until this week, never be worth real money compared to the cars that, for example, a whole shape that they only made a couple hundred of, like a McLaren F1. And if you have a really rare car, like production under 2,000 or 3,000, and then you have a ridiculously low volume variant of that, like one of 3 made in this variant of a car that they only made 2,000 of, then they're worth like metric fuck tons of money. But this is all well and good, and the collector car world is bizarre and whatever, but I saw something recently that like unsettled my whole world. And it was a BringATrailer auction where a 240Z sold for, I don't remember the exact number, but it was approximately $52.7 billion. And I don't understand this at all.
Yeah, so if you round it to the nearest $52.7 billion, it did in fact sell for $52.7 billion. If you look at the actual number it sold for, it was $310 plus 5,000 premium, so that's $315 all in for a non-S20 motored car. To be clear, it's a single overhead cam car.
Regular
240Z.
US production.
US
Datsun.
market, yeah. Datsun 240Z,
240Z
with 21,000 miles and like original family, I think, in
for
a good color.
$315,000 US dollars.
Yeah. And normally I can like vaguely make sense of these kinds of things or results, and I just truly could not. Like the argument I would give you if the car sold for 100 or 150 would be the fact that a lot of people own these cars and love them. They're intrinsically good cars. They're significant cars for Nissan. They were plentiful and cheap for a long time. They're also vulnerable to rust. And so a lot of them have just disappeared. And so to find a good one that is so undisturbed is really hard. And that line of reasoning gets me to like $100,000 to $150,000 for that car. To double that
Well, but especially when, we can look at Haggerty Price Guide for a guy, but, look at where the values of those cars were up until recently.
Yeah,
And
I know, because I had one and I was like, I'm a hero. Mine is a little bit crappy, and I sold it for $13,000.
Okay, and the nicest ones in the world were worth 30s, right?
Yeah, 30, 40.
40?
You could maybe see one at 50.
Right, so I would say, okay.
That's
so
5 years ago.
If a really, really nice car, last year was $45,000, what would it take to get, to 8 times that number? And I would assume, okay, celebrity ownership, the first ever production car off the line, a car that has never been farted in. I mean, there's got to be something. And yet, this BringATrailer car, though absolutely gorgeous, was not the color that I would have expected.
It's a nice color, and it's an unusual color. But yeah, point taken. There's no way to rationally get the car to that value. I can only get the car, even if I pull out all the rational tools in my toolbox, I can only get to halfway to the price that the car sold for.
So do you think this is an anomaly and we're never going to see another Z at that price, or do you think this has now set the price for Zs?
I think it's going to be a long time before a number like this happens again. I believe that, but I also don't know fuck all, apparently, because if you'd asked me to value the car, I would have put it in the low 100s.
Nobody knows fuck all. I mean, the thing about this situation is there's no way for you're a rationally brained person. I have spreadsheets for everything. So clearly the same way, I don't understand it. I congratulate the person who got the car, and I'm sure they got what they wanted, and I'm sure their investment will be fine, and congratulations to them, genuinely. They probably have the nicest Z in the world. That is a spectacular looking car. They drive well, they do, although I have a caveat, I've only ever driven the Z432, which we'll get back to in a second. I mean, what an amazing car. What would I rather have for $400,000 to $300 and something thousand? A current 458 or a current 488 Ferrari base with no options, or the Z? I'd have the Z. So I don't fall. I want to make that clear. I don't have the financial ability to even come close to owning something like that, but I understand someone who could do that, who does have the resources, could do it. But holy fuck, how do you 10x the price that everyone thought that car was going to be? And what the fuck?
Yeah.
They made millions of those cars.
Yep.
Or practically billions.
Well, and there's a lot of cars that of that genre where it's man, it's a really intrinsically cool car. Too bad they made so many, so it'll never be worth big money. But I mean, that's a too bad approach. But on the flip side, you say, well, it's awesome that they made so many of these because I can have a genuinely interesting world-class car. Other cars that I would put in that category, I think the Jaguar E-Type, the early E-Type, is really the same kind of excitingness in terms of aesthetics. It's a beautiful car. Enzo Ferrari is famous for having said it's the most beautiful car ever made, and I think it was clear that he emulated it with the 275, which came out subsequently. Technically sophisticated car, independent suspension all around, semi-monocoque construction, twin cam motor, disc brakes all around. It was a technically sophisticated, high-performance car that, admittedly, the press cars were tuned up, but they got 250 miles an hour in 1961. It was a more sophisticated, higher performing, more beautiful car than the contemporary Ferrari, and it cost a lot less, so they sold more. And so I think intrinsically, if they had made 1,000 E-Types, they'd be $1 million cars, but they made 72,000 of them, so they're not.
72,000 of those cars.
I mean, including the 12-cylinder ones over
Holy
the
shit.
15, 14, 13 years they were in production.
That's a lot of cars.
Yeah, it's a large volume of cars.
So what are they worth now?
The most desirable E-Type, other than the racing cars, and the racing cars are worth millions of dollars, actually. They made factory lightweight cars, they made a few dozen of, and those are worth in excess of $1 million.
You know that I've only ever driven one E-Type, right?
Yeah, and it was a lightweight.
It was one of the continuation lightweights.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: that car was sold for, I don't remember what they were selling them for. It was 7 figures, it was 2 million, I think, maybe 2 million pounds, whatever. That was one of the best drives I've ever had in my life ever. It was the car that was splendid and magnificent, and everyone told me don't ever drive a regular E-Type because this is so far and away better than the regular one is. But
I like driving regular E-Types, and if you put yourself in the mindset of what else was possible at the time, then it's a very impressive car, the E-Type.
So the lightweight that I drove, I think I have a video clip, and we can throw that in here because the noise.
Yes,
this thing
because they're
made.
Webers.
So that's the original car sounds like this too? The sort of street
No,
car?
it sounds good. It sounds like a good inline six should. Like it is a satisfying car to listen to. In any case, like it's a very significant car. It should be $1 million car, except for the numbers of them they made. Same thing with Porsche 911s. Like those are an exciting and visceral, and I don't know. Part of the value of the 911 is that it's such an icon. And so if they aren't so many of the cars, it's harder for it to be iconic because fewer people are like, oh, my dad used to have one of those, or like my neighbor had one, or
911 is an interesting case because they have made 1 million of them, right?
yeah.
And they're produced in a fairly large number by collector car standards, but they're also really good.
Yeah.
Sort of unanimously loved for the whole experience. So I think they're one of the few cars that are produced in large numbers that are actually worth a significant chunk of money. I mean, like an early long hood car that's nothing sort of special about it is still a 6-figure car, right?
Correct.
But you made a point offline, off camera, that it's the really low production variants of 911s that are
Correct. Like an RS, you have to. I mean, they made 1,580 of those, and those aren't worth $1 million, at least not anymore. The lightweights are, and they made 200 of those. So yes, the really exceptional, rare variants of 911s are worth that kind of money.
multiplier, right? It's a multiplier over the base.
Correct. And people are willing to pay up for that, especially collectors, because you get sort of this bragging right, but also the experience is different, and you get an iconic sort of recognition associated with the car. So people are willing to do that. But just, I mean, it depends on where you sit. If you are a collector and you want your car to be valuable, or you're a person who's owned the car for a long time and you want to like go on Antique Roadshow and be like, I thought this car was worth $8,500 and it's worth $85 million, then like you want a certain outcome. But if you're like a person who wants to have a cool experience, then you're like, this is great. I can afford this for like less than the cost of my house instead of more than the cost of my house. And so it depends on what kind of experience you want to have. Or if you want to be like James Bond and have an Aston Martin DB5, then you kind of need to have like house money to do that.
But they didn't make a ton of DB5s.
Correct. They're pretty rare, and actually, like, they don't drive as well as the E-types.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't driven either one, other than that lightweight.
The DB5 certainly does not drive 5 times as well as an E-type.
But it costs 5. So E-types, like, you know, a good E-type is 70 grand,
A good E-type
right?
is, if you want a Series 1, which is the pretty one, a great like coupe that's shiny all over could be had for maybe a shade under $100,000, and then a great roadster would be 25 to 50% more in comparable conditions.
So they're still not cheap.
No, they're still like kind of 6-figure-ish if you want the Series 1, which is the pretty one. But if you're willing to accept a Series 2 or Series 3, then you
Which
could,
are almost as pretty and almost as pretty as that, right? I mean, they're not exactly ugly. Really?
They're okay. Then those are like 60, 50, depending on...
What about the V12s?
So V12s are all Series 3. All Series 3s are V12s, rather. And they're like, yeah, kind of 50, 60, 70, depending on body style. There's a big delta because the 2+2s are really ugly, and all the Series 3 coupes are 2+2s.
What is the... what was I going to ask you? How many of the Series 1s did they make?
I don't know, they made tens of thousands of them. I would say that like the production is not disproportionately low. I think there's probably more Series 1s than any others, I would guess.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, like, you know, back to the Z. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how much of an anomaly this was and whether these cars are just at their prime, right? You know, we sort of both agree that there's a window that moves with time, and that, you know, that's the 30 to 50-year-old window, and the cars that are in that range tend to peak in their value and then drop as the people
who care about them expire.
Right. God, that's such a fucking terrible term. Expire? Wow. As they croak. So that's much more.
Which is much kinder.
When they keel over dead. But yeah, I think that we sort of all somehow wind up being in love with the cars that were hot when we were 12 years old, right?
Unless you have a spirit age issue like I have.
Yeah. But I mean, even still, even you, so hold on, you were that early 2000s, you were 12, yeah, you were just
I was late
weird.
90s, yeah.
Yeah, so late. Well, you do like some cars from the late '90s.
No, I certainly do. Like my standards are low. I like everything.
Right.
No, all eras. But I mean,
I thought your standards were high and you like nothing.
that's right. I'm
Okay.
a Carmudgeon.
Yes.
But my point is, there are cars that like resonate deeply with me from all decades since the 1930s or so.
But I feel like most people aren't like you. I think most
Correct.
people just really do drill into. So I'm born in '75, and I was 12 years old in 1987, and no surprise, my cars are almost all of my cars. 5 of my cars were in production in 1987, like were available for purchase in 1987.
And I mean, to
sad.
that point, I think of all my cars, most of them were in production. Well, they're mostly from the 90s. Were in production in the 90s. But that's also a reflection of the values. Like, there's a lot of cool car you can buy for not a lot of money from the 1990s. And so, as someone who's like, I would like to have a large number of cars, I don't know, 5 cars, like, I can have 5 interesting cars from the 1990s, or I could trade all those away and have one interesting car from like a more collectible era, like the 1960s. And I would rather have 5 different experiences in 5 different cars rather than have to put all my eggs in one depreciating boomer-driven market basket car.
Well, look, I think, for those of us who have had cars that were definitely pre-window and are now coming into the window, it's a good thing that we're getting there. I mean, the 80s and 90s stuff that I loved so much are really starting to come up. And I think it's a little bit late. The 240Z is late.
Frankly, I'm surprised that it's moving right now, because if you had asked me when that car was going to move, I would have said 10 years ago.
10 years ago, absolutely.
Because that's when all of the sort of A-string collector cars from the 1970s moved, was kind of like 10 years ago, like stuff like Miuras, because Miuras used to be $100,000 and now they're $1 million. And Carrera RS 911s used to be like, I remember when my brother and I was 13 and he was 18 or something like that. And we're like, when we grow up, we should split a Carrera RS. They're 80 grand. And now Carrera RSs are like 5, 6, 7, 8, 100,000. So all of those like 70s cars kind of moved, and all that movement of Miuras and Carrera RSs and 246 Dinos used to be like, they were like cheap cars, and now they're like $300,000. Those cars also, so they all kind of went, and for some reason 240Zs didn't go.
And it's not even that it was Japanese, because at that time, 10 years ago, the Toyota 2000 GT, which
went on a bit of a tear.
That one, it was the first Japanese collector car to hit $1 million, right?
Yeah, but now they've fallen off quite a bit.
Right.
And for whatever reason, they stayed cheap, and I think maybe that the sheer volume of I don't really honestly know. There's weird dynamics that play out in the collector market where I can sort of speculate retrospectively or retroactively. Retrospeculate about why something did or didn't happen. But I mean, when I bought my 240Z, there were tons of them on Craigslist, and like I bought one that was in a color that I wanted, that had blue plates and had like triple carbs and the JDM headlight covers, because that was the config that I wanted. But it wasn't that expensive, and it wasn't that hard to find at that time. I mean, I think an element of it was luck. But I don't know why they're going crazy right now.
Well,
to me, it's a little bit nonsensical.
It's a little bit
The
nonsensical.
whole result, I mean, that whole thing
is nonsensical, but the reason why I find it nonsensical...
Actually, I just thought of something. When we were discussing market dynamics with Haggerty, one of the things that they pointed to, they broke out by demographics people who were getting quotes from them, and millennials were disproportionately interested in Japanese cars. And so I think what it is that baby boomers don't care about Japanese cars, and so when baby boomers were driving the market, 240Zs didn't do anything. Now that I think millennials and Generation Xers are closer to driving the main market forces, Japanese cars are of interest. That's actually
I think that's a really interesting
upon me, but
that's a really interesting observation, and I would agree with you. The only exception would be, how do we explain things like the 2000 GT? Was it just because that was
the 2000
produced in
GT?
such
I think
numbers?
they only made 337 or something like that. 2000 GTs, and the car I think is so transcendently like beautiful and like evocative of the 1960s. Not to mention Carroll Shelby raced them, so there's a little bit of like insertion into baby boomer mindset, because Carroll Shelby raced them actively in SCCA stateside. So it's a car that somehow
across the ocean, right?
I mean, 240Zs did that too. I mean, it was such a mainstream. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
that
you used to
was,
see
right.
them street parked all the time.
Right, but the 2000 GT
I
was
think
an expensive.
It was an expensive, exotic
right.
car, and the 240Z was never expensive and exotic to boomers because they were all over the place.
Right.
And they all rusted away in the intervening years, and I think that... So the 2000 GT is an exception because of its rarity to that dynamic. And it's interesting. I mean, I would much rather have a 2000 GT than a 240Z, personally.
Okay, so
But I also have the taste of a 50 to 80 to 95.
We just
year-old
your
man.
spirit age is 94. So a friend of mine has a 2000 GT, and I've spent some time in it, and it's really truly magnificent car to drive. He also has a Fairlady Z.
Which is the 240Z as it was sold in
240Z as it was sold in Japan. That is just as good, and it's a Z432. And I think this is a car that I hope people watching know what it is, but I'm going to assume they don't, because frankly, I didn't know what it was.
Well, you know what a Hakosuka GTR is.
Otherwise known as the Hakosuka, the original Skyline GTR,
Well,
yes.
That's not how they say it in Japanese, but yes.
Yeah, well.
But yeah, the original Skyline GTR was centered around this twin cam. Did it come from Prince? It was a Prince
engine,
motor.
Yeah, so it was a Prince racing engine. So Prince was a separate Japanese
Company,
automaker that was acquired by Nissan.
In the 60s.
In the 60s, and Nissan took the Prince, so the original Skyline, the original Hakosuka, whatever you want to call it, the boxy Skyline. You know, Hakosuka is boxy.
Hako means box.
Right, and Ska is short for Skyline, which was Skyline, so it was the boxy Skyline. That was originally a Prince car that Nissan took, and Prince put in the S20 engine, which is a 2-liter
Inline
6, 4 valves per cylinder, 24 valve,
Dual overhead
cam, monster of a motor. It is epically.
It's a spicy
good.
meatball.
That's only for Italian cars. Why would you say like
Wasabi.
cocaine and wasabi? Actually, that's how I described that engine in print. Was that it was just there's nobody home under $5,000, and from 5,000 to 7,500 RPM in the 1960s. By the way, it was all cocaine and wasabi. Screams as high pitched as many higher pitched than many V12s. Absolute nut job engine, and Nissan put it in the Fairlady Z, the 240Z, and called it the Fairlady Z432. 4 for 4 valves per cylinder, 3 for carburetors, and 2 for camshafts. That car is obviously it's a Z. It's every bit as gorgeous, I'm sorry to say, as the 2000 GT and the E-Type. I think they're all interchangeably beautiful.
It's subjective, but I can entertain that notion. Might be held by someone with somewhat worse taste than myself.
I'm going to ignore that. We're going to have to edit that out because you're going to see me kill him in a second. No, but the Z432, I mean, so here you have this.
The way that the ass tapers on the 2000 GT to me is appreciable.
Yeah, until you get to the taillights, which are not as pretty as the Z's.
And the driving lights and the pop-ups.
It's awkward. Why does it have the upper lights the lower lights were a concession to the headlight regulations because the pop-up headlights were too high. It was a bad design. I'm sorry, the 240Z has the most perfect headlight shape ever.
It's just copied from the E-Type.
I don't care. Like I said, they're interchangeably beautiful. My point is only that you could get a 240Z with an engine that had its torque peak at a higher RPM than the 240Z's Redline.
Yes, because the normal 240Z motor is a kind of truckish, like sort of
based
not
on
very
what?
revvy. It's what's the 510 motor with more cylinders?
Which is based on what?
Let's see here. What could this be? Is this
can we
Japanese?
have the No. Can we have the Jeopardy
I mean, is it
song
British?
play? No.
I don't know. It's like a. What is it?
Derek. Tam-Scott. It's a fucking Mercedes motor.
Really?
Yeah, it was all licensed and copies off.
The front of the cam cover, the way it bulges, looks just like a 280
funny.
SL motor.
Yeah, that 6 was, I think, Nissan licensed the engine and were building it under license from Mercedes, and then wound up copying it and that's L series, right? It's an L24.
Yes.
And then wound up loosely basing the motor on the old Mercedes design. So it is a kind of truckish, low revving, smooth, nice engine, but
Kind
nothing
of heavy reciprocating
Yes.
mass.
in the way Mercedes does heavy reciprocating mass. But to put an S20 in that fucking car, and that's the thing, is they made a million Zs, and that green one on BringATrailer was pretty, and all the rest of the stuff. But Z432, $300,000 all day, just because of the rarity, the fact that it sounds like it does, all of it.
Yeah, and just the racy DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's shocking to me that the car went for, because we had a Z432 for under $300,000 for sale, and just nobody cared.
So this is how much was, like, what condition was? Tell me about that car.
It was just a car. There was nothing like about it where you'd be like, I can't drive this car, but like the closer you looked, you were like, it's not beautifully done. It's just kind of, someone tidied it up.
So what happens if okay, let's call this car an anomaly, the $350,000 car an anomaly, and say the value in there is somewhere in the twos, right, for the nicest 240Z in the world now. What happens to Z432 values? Are they going to just immediately go to $1 million as well, like 2000 GTs were?
I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know why. I can't intuitively. I mean, I feel it intuitively, but I can't rationally explain it. I would like to. There needs to be more data in this price point, because I truly still feel that if you put an identical car up on BringATrailer tomorrow, it would go to like 150, maybe.
I can't help but agree with you, and I just can't help but think this is one of those situations where there were just two people who wanted that fucking car that day.
Yeah.
Period.
I agree.
And I have such a hard time digesting that this car sold for $300,000. But every time that happens, I am wrong. So 2.516 Evolution 2 Mercedes-Benzes. We talked about this after the Scottsdale auction.
Yeah, but there were other data points in the same...
And I called bullshit on that every single time that happened. I mean, so the general rule was always that four-door Mercedes don't do well. Four-door collector cars never do well to begin with. Here is a car that is, okay, they made 501 or 502 of them, whatever, but is ultimately just a variant of a regular production car. It will be worth money because it has a DTM racing history and the fucking wing and all the other reasons that make that car valuable. Put it at $80,000 for the longest time, when a nice 2316 was $15,000 and a regular 190 was free. All of a sudden, those cars became 150, and I thought, stupid. And then they became 200, and I thought, shit.
I mean,
and then
you
they were
could
250.
still get one with kilometers on it for like under $200,000.
That's a lot of money for
Yes,
a mass-produced car.
But the shock of $434,000 is...
Which wasn't, by the way, a record.
Right.
There's still been higher
because
than that.
there are cars floating around there with 6,000 miles or 1,000 miles on them.
1,700 mile
and
cars.
so if you come up with cars that are that disproportionate, there are no, I mean, there probably has to be somewhere like a automatic 190E with 1,100 miles on it has to exist someplace.
Yeah, and it's going to be worth $3,200 instead of $320.
There've been ones that I've sold on BringATrailer that have like 20, 30, 40,000 miles for like 13 for a single cam
non-Cosworth, right.
automatic car. So, but point being that there's no real place at which those cars, I don't know, are worth that kind of money.
Right.
It's just that the DTM car, I guess, is that iconic.
Right. You know what? You said you were talking about the Haggerty thing, and you said that the Haggerty identified that younger people like Japanese cars, which I completely agree with. But I think there are two unaccounted factors in the collector market. Number one is the Japanese cars that were stunted in their value because of boomers, as you were talking about, and number two, the video game generation. The 2516 Evo 2 was in video games, and that's why people love it. The Skylines were in video games, which is why people now love it. And I think Gen X and Gen Y.
Really?
Yeah, that's the factor. If your car was in video games, it will be worth crazy money, because that is what we were all playing when we were 12. Not me, because, well, I was, but there were no, there wasn't Need for Speed and all the, whatever, the Nintendo 64 that people play today or whatever it is. But really, I think the cars that were the hottest shit in the games will be the hottest shit in the collector market, as those of us who are young enough to play video games age into that market and age into the financial security of it.
Yeah, so you could say maybe the video game playing like of the place of Gran Turismo and Need for Speed replaces the poster that was of the 1980s, the bedroom wall poster.
I completely agree with that. And I think that when I look at, stupid anecdotal evidence. Like, I made an Instagram post with a 2516 Evo 2, and the comments are very often, that was my favorite car in PlayStation, or my favorite car in the video games, or that really will have an influence on these cars' prices.
Okay, so why 240Z? Were those in video games?
No, but I think
it's just spillover Japanese.
I think it's spillover Japanese stuff, and that was an epically analog, beautiful car. And I bet the two people that were fighting, I think, I didn't watch the auction, but I'm assuming it was two people that were fighting over that car.
There was a third guy who dropped out at 200.
That's still...
Because I went back and looked at retrospectively, and I was like, was this just two guys, or were there like actually people, like a market worth of humans interested in this car at these prices? So the third guy dropped out around 200.
Okay, which we're probably right. The price was 150, and somebody got caught up in the moment into the two, and then this is just two guys left over who really want this car. I really think that is just one of those cars that went unnoticed because it was Japanese, and just because they were so common. And now all of a sudden people realize.
I mean, that's why I bought one. I was like, I want to listen to an inline six. I want to have carburetors. I want it to be good looking
and reliable.
That was not a consideration for me. Me.
I know you, but for most people, they are reliable cars. They're well-built, reliable cars. I mean, plasticky and in the mass-produced sort of inexpensive Japanese car of the 1960s way.
Yeah,
but
there's and that's one of the things about the 2000 GT that differentiates it from me mentally from the 240Z is the sense of quality inside is really markedly different.
It was Rolls-Royce interior.
In the 2000 GT, except for the upholstery is kind of like leatherette-y. But like the dashboard and the switchgear and the wood.
Two different types of wood inlaid with a chrome.
It's I mean, that's why those cars were so expensive, and that's why they sold so few of them, because they were like not mass-produced the way the 240Z was. In any case, that's one of the reasons for me that a 2000 GT I would like unequivocally take before I took a 240Z.
Here's the other thing about the Z is they were plentiful and now they're gone. And
because they were cheap for so long.
Right. And there's a nostalgia there that
they tend to rust.
Right. There's that too. If you see a shape often for a long time and then it goes away, you have a hole in your heart. And the best example I can give
you don't even maybe know.
That you don't even know until you see it. So I had the Scirocco out the other day. And I was in a parking lot, and I came out to the car to get in it, and this woman ran over, and she was like, "Oh my God, a Scirocco 16 valve! I haven't seen one in years," and I'm so surprised that A, she knew what it was, B, how to pronounce it correctly, whatever else. And I sat and talked to her for a couple minutes, and she had a cabriolet back in the day, and she said, "It's been so long since I've seen that car. It brings back this flood of memories." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it was great. It was a great conversation." And I get out of the car, I back out of the spot, and I get to the stop sign at the end of the parking lot, and there's a guy crossing the street who stops and goes, "Holy shit, dude, a Scirocco!" And I'm like, I look at him, I'm like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Fuck yeah." And I made it from there to a block later at a red light, and the guy next to me honks and is like, "I haven't seen one of those in years. Oh my God, that thing is great. How long have you had it?" 23 years, whatever. It was a conversation with him on the highway I got waved at, when I got off the highway. I mean, it was just in the course of 10 minutes, 7 people stopped to appreciate that. And the thing that's always behind it is a nostalgia of, I always used to see those cars on the road, and now they're gone. And I think that's what feeds into this unaware of a hole in the heart for 240s.
When they sit there being cheap too long and vulnerable to rust.
Right.
And I think that dynamic
also drove like VW bus values. Like
Yeah.
everyone I think it was Gooding in 05, a 23 window bus went for like $90,000 or $100,000, and everyone just absolutely lost it because buses were valueless for so long. And obviously such an iconic, like common familiar shape. Like of all the vehicles that I've ever driven, and I've driven all kinds of weird shit, like there are 2 vehicles that stand out as attracting more attention than anything else. One of them is a Lamborghini Countach, and the other one was a VW bus, a 21-window Safari bus with the full-length sunroof. And I think that's what it was. That car was so common and iconic and representative of like a particular era, and like everyone grew up in one or had a crazy uncle with one, or like drove across the country in one or whatever. And then they all kind of just stopped and disappeared. And so it was pervasive enough to become a cultural phenomenon that it got embedded in the psyches of a large enough number of people, and then they disappeared.
They gradually disappear so slowly so as you don't notice it until you see one.
Yeah.
And then a whole lifetime of memories comes in. This is something you'll understand one day when you're actually my age. But there are things that you haven't seen in a long time, or a song that you haven't heard or in 20 or 30 years, or a memory that comes floating back. And the amount of emotion that's attached to that is indescribable to someone who's in their 20s or
But
their
we can
30s.
quantify it. It's $150,000. The difference between what the car should have been worth and what it sold
Yeah,
for.
and that's exactly what happened. It's the only way that I can explain it, is that someone just felt a hole in their heart when they saw that car and they wanted that shape in their garage, come hell or high water. And they had the financial
I mean, yeah,
power to
I
do
have
it.
that reaction to cars all the time, but fortunately I don't have the money to act on them.
I mean, I can't imagine if I had. Can you imagine having $300,000 to spend on a Z?
I can't.
Here's the thing: is if I had $300,000 to spend on a Z, how much other money would I have
You
to
would
spend
have
on other
yes,
shit? I would
exactly.
have 75,000 fucking cars. I mean, this would be a very, very bad thing.
Yes,
for
I'd have all that
everyone.
weird crap that I wanted, plus some like actually nice and expensive stuff. But yeah. that was-
But it's really interesting how we think of, to tie the whole thing around, we think of in the collector car world scarcity and very low production as a predictor of value. And actually the asterisk and exception is things that were produced in extraordinarily high numbers but have now disappeared have a chance of going crazy.
Well, yeah, so the scarcity is still the thing that drives it. It's just the fact that the attrition rate was so high.
That's true. Yeah.
So what you
That it
need
was-
is a situation where attrition was really high for whatever reason. I mean, buses, same thing, because they got used. They were practical, sensible things to use and vulnerable to rust in the same way that 240Zs were. I mean, is there other stuff that you see that is like where attrition plays a role in the high value
I mean,
today?
everything. I mean, everything that was ever cheap, right? Including my Scirocco, for example, is a perfect example. They're all gone, and it's
Yeah.
for that reason. They were too fast, they were too cheap, they got wrapped around telephone poles, and they're all gone.
Yeah. So these sleepers probably exist with cars that were sort of common. It doesn't happen with Ferraris or Porsches so much
'Cause
because
they
they
were
were
always
treasured for their whole
Except
lives.
G308 GT14Os, which were cheap for a
That's
long
true.
time. 400i's, which were cheap for a long time,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
expensive to maintain. But the other interesting part of that equation that we haven't touched on is they have to be desirable too. Because
Intrinsically desirable or interesting or yes.
based on its shape in something like an
Independent
AMC
of volume.
Pacer.
Yeah.
Like even a Pacer, there will be a Pacer that will crack $100,000 at some point because of how amazing it looks. There will be probably not an '87 Chevy Cavalier CL that will ever fetch $100,000 because they made
Unless
a
we
million-
experience a great deal of inflation, where
Okay,
$100,000 is
$100,000 adjusted for today's time.
Okay.
Okay, so the rule of thumb is they have to be desirable and they have to be rare either then or now, and then they're worth a lot of money.
I mean, yeah, I generally counsel them. When people ask me for input about what to buy, I'd say, buy what you like. Hopefully you have good taste that is shared by a large enough number of other people for that to be.
If only I had good taste that anyone else liked. I mean, there's an e-golf sitting behind me, right? You realize?
I don't know, Cosworth.
Oh,
People
yeah,
freak out about a lot of your cars, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, mostly because they can't believe how stupid I am to have them for as long as I have. But again, memories. Many of these cars I've had for decades. That's great.
And you were one of those people who actually managed to keep them instead of let them go and be one of those like, I never should have sold that, because that's very common.
It's called being a hoarder.
Automotive hoarder.
I put the whore. No, I don't.